Well, g'day. Welcome back, everyone, to Frontlines and Faultlines. And today we get to resume our conversation with the magnificent and wonderful Leanne Barnes. It's a real hero of my region. And to pick up where we left off last time, where we outlined the horrors and the details of the massive catastrophe we faced in the Black Summer of 2019 to 20. We're still feeling the impacts and the scars of all that. And there's so much we needed to learn about how to do this better. National disasters since then have only been demonstrated to be escalating, elevating, and increasing in frequency. You know, we used to talk about 1 in 100 or 1 in 200 year events, which seem to be happening like every 5 years or 2 years. You know, it's really is a new model, a new paradigm that we have to work with. It can't be denied that this is only going to be a trend that continues thanks to the effects of climate change. So Leanne has been instrumental in doing a lot of the work since then, being at the coalface like she was. Obviously a go-to person for people who are doing the Royal Commission, like Mark Binskin, who's also a great friend, and we'll talk to him too at some point about this. And Andrew Colvin, another good friend, who is doing a lot of work. So, Leanne, welcome back, and great to have you. So let's do a deep dive now on all of that resiliency work. So if you could just describe again, the sorts of vehicles, mechanisms that were put in place to try and move forward from the experience.
I think one of the things that we wanted to do, the Recovery Committee down here in the Southeast, but also feeding back up into the Office of Emergency Management originally, and then the new Resilience New South Wales that was established in 2020, which is now the Reconstruction Authority in New South Wales, was to reflect and learn. And I think that's really important, and it's something that local government has been trying to embed, but also other agencies as well, in terms of look back, what worked, what didn't work, what were the gaps, and how can we move forward. We had got in the southeast of New South Wales all the councils together that were impacted by the fires. So that went pretty much from, we had Shoalhaven, Eurobodalla, Bega Valley, and across into, pretty much all of your patch when you were the member at that time, round up to Goulburn, down a little bit into Wagga and to Greater Hume, whatever. And so the general managers of all of those councils with the key lead agencies would meet weekly, through the response period, but then kept on meeting for a while and actually did a reflect and learn process. In New South Wales, we have groups of councils in regional New South Wales that joined together and were formed to be joint organisations of councils. And in the Canberra region Joint Organisation has 10 member councils plus Wagga like to walk with us as well. So we allow them to come on the journey. And the councils got to the Canberra Region Joint Organisation applied for funding, which was available from the state and federal governments through the Bushfire, the Community Recovery and Relief, Recovery and Resilience Program funding, and the Bushfire Local Economic Recovery Funds, and applied for funding to actually start looking at building resilience so that we were better placed into the future, that we knew what the likely climate impacts were moving forward, what were going to be the big issues that the communities and local areas would be dealing with, and then to look at how we can better plan, prepare, move into response when things happen, and really move to being into recovery and into resilience. So funding was allocated to build a Southeast New South Wales Resilience Blueprint, which was a framework of that. We had an organisation which is also based in the local area but does a lot of work in identifying and doing climate analysis. Risk Frontiers did an analysis of each local government area in there and looked at what was going to happen, increased hot days under the various climate predictions that come from the CSIRO and the council and the government. And we went through looking at what they were likely to be. We actually talked to and walked through that program with the Canberra Region Joint Organisation, the councils that were impacted by the fires, but then the whole lot. We went to every local government area, held community workshops. I think over 2,000 people were involved in community in bringing forward their ideas, their experiences, what had worked, what hadn't worked, and scoped up a framework for developing a pathway where communities, businesses, individuals, and councils could move to being more resilient in the future. That draft, or the Southeast New South Wales Resilience Blueprint, was adopted by the board of the Canberra region in 2022,
Right.
and has then been rolling through in terms of delivering the projects that actually walk with councils and communities to do that. At the same time, out of all the royal commissions and investigations and reviews, the Colvin review you've mentioned, the Glasson review, those sorts of things, we've really been saying, hey, what can we do? How can we fund this better? Because we want to be putting the money into building resilient and prepared communities rather than into recovery. The Bega Valley had a classic example, and you'd be across this. We had a bridge burned down in Wonboyne, getting in and out of Wonboyne in the 1925s. I think that was in late January 2020.
A lot of wooden bridges around the region.
Absolutely. And then, so it was burned. The funding arrangements were that you get funding, which is fabulous, to replace that, but it had to be replaced with what was able to be shown was there before. You weren't allowed to up the ante and get more money to do things. And it got then washed away with subsequent floods, and then washed away again with subsequent floods. We've now got a framework in Australia where we're looking at build back better, so that you actually get to a point where it's been, burnt, and that bridge now has been built back better, so that it won't get washed away, and it's concrete, and it won't be burnt. So, but it took a long time. And so I think the state, took all the learnings in New South Wales. Obviously the National Bushfire Recovery Agency sort of transitioned to the National Emergency Management Agency. The Resilience New South Wales became the New South Wales Reconstruction Authority here in this part of the world. And we've really been looking at what are all the learnings, what were the gaps, and how can we do things better into the future. And that is taking time, but it is progressing. So we've got the State Disaster Mitigation Plan in New South Wales, which is really the first one of those in Australia, to walk down how can we look at identifying what the issues are and then mitigating how they will be addressed into the future, so that they're minimized or removed, or at least, look at what a tolerable risk is so that we can progress. And then building the understanding of communities or individuals and local councils to build capacity to be able to do things differently, not necessarily, big, ticket cut your ribbon on things, but how do we do things? How can we do it differently? And how can we support communities to be more resilient? So it's a real passion of mine. That's why I stayed involved after you and I have been talking about this, but I don't believe in retirement per se. But after I sort of stepped into semi-retirement or whatever, it's a passion to actually walk this pathway and walk with the councils, walk with the communities to actually do things differently. And an online version of the Resilience Blueprint has now been launched. That was launched in Parliament House in New South Wales on the 5th of June. And a range of tools have been developed to help councils make decisions. This is the climate. This is what it's likely to be. And one of the things that was a real surprise for me, that this area is one of the ones that is most impacted by numbers of declarations. A Wingecarribee, I think in the last 3 or 4 years, has had 15 or 16 natural disaster declarations. That cumulative pressure on that community and that council is costly in a whole range of things, personally for the people involved, for the resources, and then financially, of course. So having those tools to work through that process. But one of the climate things I don't think we'd really picked up down in this area, I know Western Sydney had, and they've done a lot of it, is the increasing number of hot days, warm days, and having places where older people, more vulnerable people, people that can't deal with heat, what they do and where they go and how they build, or where there are community places that they can go. So it's been an interesting journey, and I think it's now transitioning into its next phase. We've got decision guides for each of the councils. We're now looking at what we do with disaster waste. So the Canberra Regional Organisation and a number of others, it's a huge issue dealing with waste.
Contaminated waste, asbestos, all these things.
Asbestos, yeah, and just the volume of waste, how we deal with that, and then also looking at doing critical infrastructure plans for councils. So, and for the state, obviously, there's the telecommunications, there's water infrastructure, there's power infrastructure. How do you make sure that the service stations got power so that they can pump it into a fire truck or to the SES and those sorts of things? So those critical infrastructure plans, and you will well remember Warren Sharp from Eurobodalla. Warren is a very passionate person about the infrastructure. He was the director of infrastructure at Eurobodalla. He did a lot of work. He was also the local emergency management officer. That's another issue we have in terms of a senior person also having to wear that hat.
Right.
But he has done a lot of work since he also stepped down into his, departed council after a long time, in working in terms of what is a tool that can help councils and communities look at what the critical infrastructure is and how you plan to make sure that's resilient into the future. So a lot of good things, a lot of learnings, and after the state disaster mitigation plan was put in place, and the Reconstruction Act was brought before Parliament and worked through the processes, and now working through with all areas of New South Wales to develop disaster adaptation plans. And that's going to be another really good pathway. They're trialling one in the Hawkesbury to roll that out, just looking at flood, and one in the Northern Rivers area, looking at multi-hazards, and also looking at the resilience blueprint down here in this part of the state to look at how we can help all areas of the state really being prepared and doing that adaptation planning.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned this Build Back Better philosophy, and there's so many aspects to that smashed me in the face. I mean, through all the disasters that we dealt with, and as a member of the executive, I'd get sent out when we had massive floods, and we had Cyclone Yasi and the fires in Victoria all through our time in government the first time round. And I remember being up in Parks with Mark Coulton, the member there, and he took me to see some different impacts on certain things like roads. So he'd show me a road where the money had been spent to build the road properly in engineering terms, and a road where they kind of cut costs and did it sort of down and dirty option. And the floods had just completely disappeared that road. It was gone. And so it was start from scratch again. And then he showed me the road that had been properly engineered and built. It was still there. Not much needed to be done to get that up and running again. And you saw old bridges, even if they weren't wooden, but engineering's advanced a little bit over 150 years.
Correct, it has.
And just the sheer amounts of gravel that covered farmland, to a depth of about a metre, just amazing impacts. But the infrastructure was the big thing for me, and we had that story too play out in the Tartar Wharf, which, as you mentioned, like my great-great-great-grandfather built. But the argument there was, for example, that, they're just going to get money to put it back the way it was, instead of, well, actually, there's things that we can do that make sure this doesn't happen again. If we re-engineer this a bit, there's and this is the thing, the debate you often have, and, the philosophy does need to be there, or Build Back Better, for the simple reason that you save a lot of money that way. You don't have to keep going back to redo this infrastructure, and that has a really big impact in relation to the insurance side of it. So, I hope that we're really getting across that. Of course, the implication of that is you've got to have the funding to do it
Yes.
better the first time round. And so there's an issue around how we, raise the money for that, how we, build our resilient country for the future what investments needed to be made there and whether we can actually, apply that funding and find that funding. Certainly councils can't find it.
No, it's a absolute challenge with the financial sustainability issues faced by all local government across the country. But I think, and you mentioned Andrew Colvin before, and he was, obviously having had a long
Mhm.
period with the federal
Federal
police,
police.
um, and then doing the National Bushfire Recovery Agency, and he led an inquiry into disaster funding arrangements in Australia, which has, been up with the government in terms of looking at how, rather than the billions, and it is billions that is currently going into recovery, how we look at moving that dial to more into building the resilience so it doesn't have to go into recovery and work. As I understand it, and New South Wales has done a review as well, is working to look at how that balance can be readjusted. And there has been good package of funding pulled together by the federal government, the current government, and to put into building resilience. So councils and other agencies have been able to apply for that funding and have been getting good, amounts of money. But really, we have to. My passion is for councils and other agents to start realizing that building resilience is now very much. A lot of people talk about local government being roads, rates, and rubbish, but I think the big red R is resilience and building resilience. We're going to be doing asset management plans for bridges or roads or our sewer programs or our, protecting our water areas and whatever. Build in a resilience overlay and resilience factors, and councils are getting much better at doing that. Resilience has been really embedded. The New South Wales, the Sydney councils have Resilient Sydney, and they've just adopted their most up-to-date plans, and all the councils are pulling together resilience plans. The Bega Valley, for example, has actually put resilience criteria into their integrated planning and reporting, and are actually embedding. Had some funding from the federal government to look at putting resilience into their infrastructure and into their investment processes. If you're going to do it, and you're going to have to do an asset management plan for it, build into that resilience. So when you renew it in a resilient way. So I think that that's going to be critical to how we operate into the future. And it's about looking back. And if we keep on doing what we always did, we're going to keep on getting what we always got. So you have to do things differently. And there seems to be a willingness and a desire to do that. I know I spoke to Brendan Moon from National Emergency Management Agency the other day, and he's been giving presentations for the last 3 years at the Australian Local Government Association conference.
Right.
This year it was standing room only. They had a panel, and so there was a range of people from Australian Institute of Disaster Resilience, and there was, National Emergency Management Agency and whatever. But the mayors from across the country that are now seeing this absolutely on their doorstep all the time were really there wanting to see, and discuss and look at how they can do things differently into the future.
Oh, that's very encouraging. I must say, though, that some of the areas that I feel have still been neglected, sort of taking a step back a bit to a higher level nationally. One is I don't think emergency management nationally has adopted the best technology that we could be using here, taking advantage of the advances that have been made in AI and analytics and processing large amounts of data, the sorts of opportunities that drone technology can provide you, at least around areas where you've got population centres and key infrastructure. And then, of course, I look at the response. This is an issue that worries me greatly. And I mentioned, the ageing cohort in our volunteer organisations, and volunteerism has been like the backbone of Australia in so many ways. The worth it has to the economy is almost incalculable, but it's in multiple billions of dollars that we haven't had to spend. But of course, with increasing automation, we might have to revisit this and start to find ways to wage that voluntary sector in the future. It might be the only place where a human can actually get a job. But
Yes.
but in the short term, this response capability And we don't want to tie up the ADF, as having this as a main strand of their reason for being, because just training the ADF is so intense to take them offline to do all these things, and it has had an impact on them. Responding to the waves of disasters has really interfered with their training cycle and programs. So, the question then needs to be really seriously looked at as where we go from here in that respect. And one of the things during that time that I tried to get people to start talking about was the possibility of creating a civil defence regime, and which could enlist and build numbers of people who can actually get out there on a fire line, for example, but do all the relief. I mean, we've seen a lot of great community response, like the famous Tinny Fleet, during floods up north, etc.
Yes.
But it's kind of inadequate in some ways, and also the air assets required for the water bombing. I don't think we've thought creatively enough about how we're going to manage that challenge. And you mentioned, these temperature issues. I mean, I took a photograph of the temperature gauge in my vehicle when I was travelling through Tumut during that time, and it was Doctor Mountain there, and it was 50 degrees Celsius, which nobody had experienced there before. And that is
No, and yeah, I think that you might you've actually hit it on the head. And there is work commencing. I know that in terms of looking at more sensorizing of the environment, in terms of looking at moisture, moisture. I know the Bureau of Meteorology are doing an enormous amount of work, and CSIRO. And so suppose it's about those agencies and organizations and how they get the funding. The other side for me in the work that moving forward is how you build the resilience of communities, to understand that don't rely on anyone rocking up in the first 72 hours. Make sure that if something's coming your way, you can look after yourself. And University of Canberra have a fabulous unit, the Wellbeing and Resilience Unit, headed up by Professor Jackie Shermer, and they've worked with regional areas all around Australia. They do an annual survey, which they've been doing for a long time, on the well-being of communities, and they've now expanded that into cover resilience. And they did the survey work for our resilience blueprint. But it is about looking at the various factors that impact into how a person feels about what their well-being is, but also about how resilient they are for a whole range of things: financially resilient, but also resilient to impending disasters or disasters that might come along. And I think that work's charting that and how people feel and how ready and prepared they are is going to be really, really important. They've got some further funding to continue that work, and there's a fabulous online hub, community resilience hub, that they had some funding from the drought hub, and the drought resilience work, but looking at broader things from that. So that work, I think, is absolutely critical, because individuals can go in there and fill that in. And they've also put into that that survey work, looking at how you can access the various resources, the insurance resources, or the tradespeople, or those sorts of things. So that that work is really critical to giving us a baseline, but also charting how people are feeling about how resilient they are.
Yeah, there's a health aspect to do with that as well, which I am experienced only too well from my deployments into very hot places. I was trying to get that message across at the time for the fireys, because I've had 14 procedures in the last couple of years, and 12 of those were related to the effect on my kidneys from severe dehydration and whatnot.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a really serious aspect of it that relates to health. But has there been any conversation about the capacity, the response capacity, Leanne, in terms of that issue I mentioned? Like, do we look at a civil defence organisation where we maybe get the kids out of high school, incentivise them to be part of it?
Yes, I don't know about that in terms of having that discussion about that side of it. I know there has been, and there continues to be in New South Wales, discussions around the framework of the capacity and capability of local government as a key organisation, but also the major state agencies, whether it be RFS or SES or ambulance or police or reconstruction authority as a critical one in building all of that together.
Right.
Local governments, as you would know, with dealing with the ones around here, there's a real continuum of capacity and capability. Some of them are so stretched they struggle to do the basics. So doing more in terms of being able to, that they play a very key role in response, but also in preparedness and building their resilience and then moving if there's been an event into recovery.
Hmm.
I mentioned Warren Sharp, I think, last time in terms of the role he's played in building resilience. Well, he was a director of a very large council being impacted by significant fires and floods and COVID and whatever. But he was also the local emergency management officer. Now, councils shouldn't have to have just a designated person. They should have standalone local emergency officer positions or resilience staff that can be actually working, and getting that funded is going to
Right.
be critical, I think, in terms of that. In terms of the broader national discussion about response and whatever, I know that that would be being undertaken, but I'm not aware of
Right.
discussions at that level.
Yeah, I'm certainly hoping that they pick up the technology angle to that, which also, if you've got
Absolutely.
the
Yes.
the weather organisations like the BOM, etc., and there's so much that can be done now. I've just seen it in action, but the other part of that in the resiliency equation is that one of the things we learnt was the redundancy aspect of Telstra's uh, framework, and they lost power to all these mobile towers, etc. And so one of the thoughts was to create a depot in Cooma, for example, with a stockpile of emergency generators that could be deployed to get power to mobile towers, etc.
They're doing Telstra, well, telecommunications agencies are doing a lot of work in planning and trying to transition that at the moment. Absolutely. I know most of the council water utilities are also doing it. And I think the power utilities, well, it's about, with fires, and absolutely those ideas are fabulous that came out of that. But then you've had the floods. So I think it's really front and center for those utility organizations to be thinking about how they build that real resilience and into their networks, so that you don't lose power, you don't lose telecommunications, but also building and you don't lose access to water. But building into the planning that individuals, communities, and organizations do,
Mhm.
what you need to be able to be self reliant for a period of time until those things get up and running again.
Yeah, I think what helped me to sort of be a bit of a communications hub at that time was we had quite a few people spread around the region who had satellite connections
Yeah.
for their internet. So I was able to use them as kind of disseminators. And
Yeah.
hopefully we'll see more of that, with the Starlink style, sort of spread of connection, which is invulnerable, I guess, to what's happening terrestrially. But the other side of
Where they are rolling out a lot more towers, which is
Yep.
with the government are rolling out a lot more towers, which is great as well.
Yeah, no worries. Well, the other side of it was the communications amongst, the RFS and CFS, for example. They didn't have things that could speak to each other, uh, etc. So I don't know if there's been anything to address that. Or,
I think they're doing a lot of all of the states now have cross-border commissioners.
right.
We've always had one, and Kalina Koloff, who was with the Canberra Region Joint Organisation and had done a lot of work in the fires and whatever, is now the New South Wales cross-border commissioner. And there's one in Victoria and one in Queensland and whatever. They get together, and they've actually been hosting sessions to bring together the various fire agencies, telecommunications, other organisations, just to ensure that all of those issues are progressed in a different way. And a lot of the apps, in terms of where you find out information about getting ready and all those sorts of things. There was a period of time where the Black Allen line was a real line that the
Yes.
app would stop working
Yes.
either way. So they're trying to make Australia a lot more borderless
Yeah.
in that process. So no matter where you're traveling or where you're going, you're getting the information that you need, and you can see what's happening the other side of the border. For a place like Bendoc,
Yep.
you can actually see what's happening over in Victoria rather than there having a line there. So that a lot of the things from the commissions have been picked up, which I think is really good,
Right.
and it just takes time.
Yes.
But there's a fabulous program, New South Wales, through the Reconstruction Authority are rolling out as part of their Get Ready program is knowing the apps and how to use them and where you are and all that sort of stuff. So I think that we are improving in that space.
Yes, because you've got a lot of citizens who are a bit technically challenged too, so we have to
Yes.
factor that in as well. But techno stress. But look, yeah, I mean, paradigm paralysis, where you've got people who are focused on artificial lines on maps or the jurisdictional structures and how we manage these things nationally. It's, raise your sights and think of ourselves as a nation that has to be able to respond in a coordinated way, which also comes back to the systems that we use to analyse and plan for the future. So, but thank you, Leanne, so much for all that labour of love you've put into this, all love you've shown to our region. You've left an amazing legacy personally. I don't know if people have honoured you enough for that.
Oh, no, don't need it.
But certainly I am so grateful for all you've done, for all our families, for our communities. And I just hope that that people are continuing to draw on your experience and expertise. But thanks for being with us for this conversation. Really appreciate it. Hopefully it's impactful. Lift your heads up, people. Resilience, climate change, these are matters that are as much a security issue as terrorism, frankly, with the loss of lives we've had and the damage we've suffered. So,
Look, I think, and Mike, just look, in my closing, I think we're very lucky in this region. Christy McBain, who was the mayor of the Bega Valley, I know you've been a strong ally and supporter of hers and took over your seat.
yeah,
Got a lot of, after you sadly had to step down, but she's taken a lot of interest in this. She's now not only the Minister for Local Government, but also in regions and territories, but emergency management. So I think that we've got a good voice, and the legacy and you're handing over to her leaves her in a very good position to progress and get these things. She really hit the ground running in picking up emergency management as part of her portfolio with the floods in central New South Wales, just Central Coast New South Wales. But I think that it's about us all joining up and all working together. But the role that you've played in supporting this and these sorts of discussions, I think, is really, really important as well. So thank you as well.
oh no, good on you, Leanne. Well, look, thank you everybody for being with us. I hope you've learned something from this. I hope you add your voice, talking to your politicians, being cognizant of the challenges your councils face, and try not to be too hard on them. But creating and contributing any ideas you may have as well. So we'll leave it there for this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can sustain our efforts in promoting these conversations. And we'll see you again next time. Cheers.